Hey there and welcome in Big Ten Today, the Monday Schmooze presented by Gatorade. It is great to have you with us, Dave Revson and Jake Butt. That was a heck of a Saturday.
You just fall in love with the game all over again, right? Not just in our conference, but the upsets across the board. It's just a reminder that college football is in a very healthy place. Like, this is as much parity as we've had in a really long time, Dave.
No doubt, a ton of fun. We saw 5 top 11 teams go down on Saturday and a 6th in Miami, narrowly escaping. One of the guys who was on hand to witness a top 11 upset, Yogi Roth, was in Minneapolis, part of a great call on that win for Minnesota over the Trojans, joins us. And Yogi, have you recovered yet?
You know how it is, man. Probably not, but you just keep charging ahead, which is what's amazing about this. And that is also the challenge for the teams that lost. Like, how do you recover? How do you really turn the page? And I think the things that stood out to me most, looking back at the majority of the games in this league over the weekend, was that certain teams met the moment. Right? Whether it was Minnesota going for it on 4th and inches at the goal line, or Nebraska with a big stand on the goal line, the 6 straight plays they had to stop. Rutgers in that regard. UW met the moment. Right? Here comes the surge from Michigan. Like, that to me is what continues, as Jake referenced so eloquently, like, to make this game continually just be beautiful.
And a little evidence, too, perhaps, of why things are tougher with 9 conference games rather than 8, something that one would hope the committee will keep in mind come December. The pollsters certainly keeping it in mind. That is part of our big story as we see the strength of the Big Ten being highlighted. The first time ever that the league has had 3 of the top 4 teams in the AP poll: Ohio State, Oregon, Penn State, 2 through 4, with Texas at number 1. As you may have heard, the Bucks and the Ducks play this weekend at Autzen. Indiana up 5 spots after winning at Northwestern. Illinois and Michigan are 23 and 24. They will play in 2 weeks in Champaign. USC and Nebraska, by the way, the top 2 among the others receiving votes. So, again, I realize the biggest game this weekend, maybe in terms of the shocking result, was Minnesota and USC, and we will certainly get to that and give it its due. But I think with an eye on how big Ohio State and Oregon is this weekend, let's start with those two, the 2 highest-ranked teams in the Big Ten preparing to go head-to-head. Yogi, let's start with the Buckeyes. It was a game against Iowa until it wasn't. Really showed their strength in the second half. What did you learn?
Well, I think we all know the explosive ability. I think quarterback Will Howard has continued to impress. I just fell in love with not only the offensive line, but really it was the defensive front 7, right? The way that they were just able to clamp down, allowing really just one big run later in the ball game to that dynamic rushing attack, but how they not only were gap sound, but they were just squeezing gaps. There was not a lot of oxygen to run through if you were anyone on this Iowa offense. I liked Iowa's game plan. First drive of the game, and thinking, okay, here we go. I kind of like where they're going. They're moving the ball. They think this defense is so physical. The quote that I love from their coaches, they go 60 minutes of like 9-on-7. And that's really what this team has been. And they've proven to be one of the most physical and one of the most dominant teams in America. Shut out again this weekend.
I completely agree. And, that was the offseason narrative. You have Urban Meyer and Jim Tressel and everyone saying, man, this roster is so talented. And the players kind of shut that down. They took initiative. They're like, we are tired of being told how talented we are. We want to be the most physical team in college football. And I completely agree. The defensive front 7 stood out for me, and specifically the impact that Tyleik Williams has when he's on the field. He had missed some time. He gets back healthy. Man, he was the best player in that front on a number of plays. And I get it. Oregon's offense is going to present more challenges than Iowa's offense. But I thought Iowa's offensive line was playing some of the best ball in recent history. Right. Obviously, Caleb Johnson is extremely productive. They had him shut down the entire game. And another guy, as this applies to the matchup this weekend, Sonny Styles just continues to pop on tape. A guy that came in as a safety. Jim Knowles moves him down inside the box. I just think about the flexibility that gives him as a play caller. Michigan State, they had linebacker Cal Halliday matched up on Tez Johnson a few times. That's not a great matchup, right? Johnson was able to easily win. You feel a lot better about Sonny Styles if he's caught in those situations because of his background as a secondary element. This Buckeye defense has been talented, but they're playing like they take every single week with a chip on their shoulder. They're playing physical and pissed off, and it's beautiful to watch.
They've given up 34 points in 5 games, and you guys both kind of touched on this, and it is interesting because we think about the narrative last year. You think back to the Notre Dame game and that odd ending when the Irish didn't have enough players on the field, but Ryan Day in the postgame talking about the physicality and calling out Lou Holtz, and this is something that they have internalized with Ohio State, and maybe they thought they had turned the corner last year. In the end, it turned out perhaps they hadn't. But now I think they believe they have, and there's a lot more evidence here this year. Because you're right, Jake, like Iowa has been really good on the offensive line, and absent that last drive where Iowa scored and Caleb Johnson ends up with a respectable running total. But if you watch the game, you understand the degree to which that Iowa run game, which has been very good, was bottled up.
Yeah, it's, talent. When you look at why Ohio State has fallen short of their ultimate goals, it really wasn't talent. Like, it wasn't coaching. It certainly isn't a resource thing. Like, Ohio State had all the ingredients to reach their goals. So what was it? And I think part of it has been mentality. And, I got the chance to call Ohio State's game against Western Michigan earlier in the season. So I asked Ryan Day about this, and he certainly agreed. It's part of the reason Travion Henderson decides to come back. JT Tuimoloau decides to come back. Jack Sawyer, Emeka Egbuka, these guys that have been in the program and have had a ton of success and certainly could be playing on Sundays, they had guys make the decision to say, we have unfinished business here in Columbus, and we're coming back this season to go ahead and not just win it, they want to take it out of their opponent's hands.
170 rushing yards in all 5 games this year. Just by means of comparison, they only had 4 such games last year, so they are already outstripping last year's pace. And again, to do it against the team that they did it against, Yogi, speaks volumes. Iowa, as we know, has been a fabulous defense. First time since 2021 they gave up more than 400 yards in a game. I want to give you the last word. Quick takeaway on the Hawkeyes. What did you learn about Iowa?
Okay, cool. I think the number one thing for this team, and I like what their head coach, Kirk Ferentz, said after the game, is that, look, we did some good things. And I think going back and watching the game, I saw the score as we were preparing for our game on Saturday, and you're like, whoa, what happened? It must have been total domination. I think there's elements that they do some good things when you're watching this ball game. And I think that they're not in the top tier of this league right now. That's clearly Ohio State and I think Oregon. Like those two at the top, Penn State, we'll see. But they're right there. Right? There's times on third down where they do a nice little job getting, McNamara climbing the pocket. They have to obviously be better in the pass game, but in terms of their identity, they're not going to change overnight. And I think they're still going to continue to give everybody a tough out like they did at Minnesota, like we've watched them week in and week out. So I think they're in a good position. They just went up against truly one of the top 4 teams in America, if not the best team in America, in Ohio State.
And the issue is against the ranked teams, they have fallen short. There was a lot made going in to this week's game about the fact they didn't score in 3 games against ranked teams last year. They've lost 8 in a row now, scoring 51 points total in those games. Again, Ohio State gets Oregon on Saturday, and that Oregon team knocked off Michigan State on Friday night at Autzen. Really played well in this one. It gets us to our Gatorade game leaders. Remember those first 2 weeks of the season when we were wringing our hands over Oregon's inability to run the ball? That is a thing of the past. The leading rusher in the Big Ten this weekend, none other than the Ducks' Jordan James, a career-high 166 yards. It marked the 2nd straight week, 3rd in the last 4. He's gone over 100 yards. And, Yogi, we talk about how physical Ohio State is and how good the offensive line is, and really both lines of scrimmage. You could say the same about Oregon. They are really hitting their stride.
Yeah, they're looking like the team that we all talked about all summer long, all training camp long, and then kind of wondered, hey, what's going on in the first couple weeks of the season? I think much like Ohio State, they can come at you in waves offensively, right? All of a sudden, it's Jordan James, as the aforementioned running back you referenced. It's Tez Johnson. It's Evan Stewart. There's a lot of talented players there. But what makes them special, and I think what makes this game so amazing, and Jake, I bet we're on the same page. If we were calling it this weekend, we would be talking about how their defense comes at you in waves. Not many teams in recent history can say that. Georgia could say that a couple years ago, and all those guys were drafted. I think Ohio State and Oregon can do that too. Look no further than the defensive front. They play 8 to 10 players on the defensive line every single game. They played 10 over the weekend against Michigan State when the game was still on the line. Jordan Birch, of course, leading the way, and he's looking the part, much like Jack Sawyer looks the part. You can't block him one-on-one. He's using his size, his strength, his athleticism to his incredible ability. He's taking advantage of it. And then guys like Mateo Uyunglele, Tatum Tuioti. I mean, what we are going to see on Saturday night is going to be the most physical game, I think, in the country. And I know they can't do it, but I would be petitioning, like, can we get a bye after this one? Because both teams are going to need it. I mean, it's really going to be that physical in the trenches when Ohio State heads to Eugene to face this front on both sides of the Oregon Ducks.
Yogi, I got to think on my feet because you just rattled down my exact notes right there. That was my takeaway as well. And you think back to the offseason for Oregon, like what was the headline? You're bringing in Dylan Gabriel. You're bringing in Evan Stewart. Obviously, we know who Tez Johnson was. We were ready to see some explosive offense, but the defense is really the identity of this team. They're top 10 in total defense, top 10 in passing efficiency allowed on defense. And you mentioned Jordan Birch. Like, could we say he's the best player on the team at this point? Like, in terms of NFL potential, maybe as high as anyone. 6'6", 300 pounds. You saw a couple of those highlights with his long arm. He's unblockable and disruptive. That's going to matter significantly this weekend. But what was really impressive and what has to happen this week is the offensive line has to play to that standard. Because Michigan State's defensive coordinator, Joe Rossi, he likes to bring pressure and simulated pressure. They brought a ton of different looks. They were trying to pressure Dylan Gabriel. Oregon's offensive line shut that down. It was almost like they were anticipating and seeing things before they happened. We know Jim Knowles is going to be aggressive and bring pressure once again. So their offensive line continues to get better. That was probably their best performance of the season last week. Obviously, Jordan James, their running back, had his best performance. This game is going to be decided by the trenches. All the great skill players on both sides of the football for both teams, the trenches will decide Ohio State, Oregon.
I think that's what's so cool about this game is there's not a discernible weakness on either team. I think sometimes you go into a game and you think, okay, it's strength against strength. It's this team's passing game against this team's secondary or whatever it is, any number of different combinations. I don't see that in this game. I mean, both of these teams are explosive with incredible skill position talents who we have highlighted. But the defenses are both elite. And to your guys' points, they're both really physical and really good on the line of scrimmage. So you're talking about two complete teams and what it comes down to. I just don't think there's any obvious matchup that you would look at and say, well, this team has the advantage here.
That's where coaching matters. And I think about Ryan Day and Dan Lanning almost looking in the mirror at one another because both these coaches have won a ton of games. I mean, as much as anybody. And both of them have fallen short of their ultimate goal. Both have struggled to beat their rivals. Both have national championship aspirations, but haven't done it. Both have conference title aspirations and haven't done it. So there's going to be a winner and a loser this weekend, and it's going to be a huge win for obviously whatever team does come out on top. But then there'll be a mental battle for whichever team falls short this weekend of having to pick themselves back up again, regardless to your point. Clearly two of the best teams in college football. We're going to see a great college football game this weekend.
And it should be an incredible atmosphere, too, at a place where Oregon's had all kinds of success. Yogi, 34 wins in their last 35 home games. Give you the final word on these two teams for today, although there's going to be a lot of discussion between now and Saturday on this network on this game.
Yeah, I think I'm going to petition to get on the show every day this week just to talk about this ball game with you guys. I'll say this, two things, I think, to echo what Jake just referenced. Number one, QB run game. I mean, you want to bring pressure, you want to play man coverage, go ahead, because both of these quarterbacks are able to tuck it and run. So I think the defensive coordinators and Tosh Lupoy and Coach Knowles, when they bring pressure, where the eyes are in terms of the running backs who we know can go out the gate any single time they touch it, but also both of these quarterbacks pulling it. And then to the coaching, to me, it's going to be so fun in situational football, right? Is it 4-down territory? Both of these coaches go for it on 4th down, right? Ryan Day did just a week ago, or a couple days ago, right? Dan Lanning historically has done it in big games, not afraid to go for it instead of kicking a field goal. All of those elements, I think, will be at play in this ball game. So get your rest. You will not be able to take a snap off when these two face off on Saturday. And you're right about Autzen. It's going to be insane, man. I mean, it's going to be, they've had big games there. This gets as big as any of them. I think it even rivals when their rival UW comes to town. This people have been circling for a really long time.
First time in 8 years they will have hosted a top 5 team at Autzen Stadium. So it should be fabulous. And again, with them being in the top 5, not just in the top 5, but in the top 3, it's going to be off the hook. It is really going to be good.
Roll the boat, sky him up!
Little extra enthusiasm for PJ Fleck, and who can blame him? Minnesota gets just its 5th win over an AP top 15 team this century, scoring the game's final 14 points to knock off number 11 USC 24-17. Just an awesome night. Of course, the game was here on the Big Ten Network, and a great job calling it. Yogi, you guys were just phenomenal. So let's give you the first word on this one. Just kind of take us through that night and what you take away from it, both sides, from Minnesota's point of view and USC's as well.
Yeah, I think coming into the game, as you're preparing for it, our crew with Rhett Lewis, who you just saw, and Guy Haberman and myself and the production truck, we were like, this is going to be tight. And you meet before every game, you think this is going to come down to a couple plays. And as the game unfolded, you're thinking, okay, SC is going to find a way here late when they have the ball to win a great, gritty road win, their first road win in the Big Ten. And then with that turnover on the interception, you're thinking, okay, here we go. And I just think that was the game. There was such momentum surges back and forth. And it lived up to the billing, at least that we anticipated it being a tight game. I think when I come down and think about what I'll take away from this game, well, it's, of course, PJ Fleck deciding to go for it. And I'm up there in the booth watching guys, and I'm saying, he's not talking to the kicker. The kicker's out over there on an island by himself, and usually at least they meet for a second. And you're saying to yourself, I think they're going to go for it. I think they're going to do it. And then the drama of is he in? From our vantage point, it wasn't even close. But, of course, they don't call it a touchdown, so you have to go through all the elements of replay. And then it finishes in the fashion it did with the Coy Parrish interception you see right there, who's a Minnesota-born player who wanted to stay at home. I mean, it just had everything with the crowd rushing the field you could dream of as a broadcaster. I mean, you didn't want to leave the stadium because the energy was so infectious. So I think for Minnesota, they're right. I mean, they were the best 2 and 3 team in America, just like Coach Fleck told us in advance of the game. I think when you flip on an SC and Lincoln Riley after the game saying, hey, we're 2 snaps away from being 5-0, there's a world where that makes a lot of sense. And there's also a world where they got to be able to protect a little bit better in the passing game. And we'll talk, I'm sure, as the week goes on about the Penn State matchup this weekend. But the run game, SC was on it. Obviously, Minnesota was as well. But pass protection-wise, I just thought the Trojans, when they needed to keep the pocket clean for Miller Moss after the first quarter, that they really struggled in that regard.
Over the years, PJ Fleck has taken his fair share of heat, right? And I think the expectations have been high in Minnesota, and they've fallen short in some of these moments traditionally. And Yogi, you talk about meeting the moment. If we're going to give him heat, we give him a ton of credit for winning this game. Traditionally, I would have anticipated PJ to just kick the field goal on 4th and goal there, right? Just take the points, take the lead. But he believed in his team, and he was rewarded for that. He earned the right to celebrate in a great moment post-game with Rhett Lewis down there interviewing him. Just a beautiful scene. How about Darius Taylor? Like when you talk about meeting the moment, 200 all-purpose yards, like that might have been his best game when you consider the context of the entire of his entire career. Going into this game with Minnesota's defense, they've been phenomenal. But I had questions. Was it because they played Iowa and Michigan? Like what is this pass defense going to look like? They made things really difficult on Miller Moss and Lincoln Riley throughout the entire game. To talk about USC real quick, I have serious concerns about their offensive line. I don't know how they can win anything meaningful if they don't figure out a way to protect better. I mean, It has been an issue all year long. And one thing what I've noticed, and Yogi, I don't know if you've noticed this as well, their tackles are extremely late off the ball. Part of that's being on the road, right? And it was the same thing in Ann Arbor. Their tackles are late off the snap, so they're already at a disadvantage. And there's no punch in their pass pro. So those are 2 areas I think that could be emphasized to give them a chance. But Miller Moss is getting beat up every single week, man. Like that guy, you want to keep him healthy for the rest of the season.
And Yogi, you've been following USC for quite a while here at Pac-12 Networks. But this was a story last year as well, right? I mean, it just felt like Caleb Williams was running for his life quite a bit. And the sense was that they felt like they had addressed it in the offseason. But to Jake's point, Moss has been under duress quite a bit. This was a line of scrimmage game. And,
100%.
And look, USC did run the ball well. So give them credit for that. Woody Marks is really good. But the line of scrimmage still, the edge went to Minnesota, and they just wore USC down at the end of the game.
Yeah, I thought that, from a run game standpoint, they almost ran it at will all night. A lot of the movement runs when they're pulling different offensive linemen, showcasing the athleticism that they have, Jake, to your point of getting off the ball. Like, these guys can move. To me, I wonder to the tackle position, like when you play that position, and clearly I've never played offensive tackle, but from studying it to me, it's all about playing with tremendous confidence. And I think sometimes when you're seeing a dynamic defensive front, and that's what Minnesota is. I mean, you go back and watch that game, guys are lining up all over the place. Cody Lindbergh sometimes is playing defensive end. I mean, they were out with one of their best players at a defensive end position. But overall, the movement, the looks, the stems, the late drops, I mean, it makes you think a little bit. And I got to wonder at times at the tackle position if they're overthinking things, and that's where they're a hair late. And sometimes they're a hair early and they're overstepping and they get beat inside. So they got kind of beat in a bunch of different fashions in that regard. USC wants to get their tight ends out in the route, so they're not always staying in protection. The backs, they need to get them out. We know what Woody Marks did. I mean, he and Taylor were the two stars of this game for both teams offensively. And then I'll go to the receivers. I mean, you guys have heard me love up this receiving corps from USC since the moment I came onto your team. And I thought that they did not play their best game on Saturday night. Part of that, yes, Jake, was the secondary. But there were times where I thought some of the wideouts, whether it was an early drop, Zachariah Branch, this guy doesn't drop the ball. I was at practice this week. He's the last guy off the field every single day. I mean, his hands are one of his superpowers. But then all the other elements of coming back to the ball on a curl route or a hook route, things like that, they just got beat to the point of the ball. And that, to me, was very impressive from a Minnesota standpoint on driving to the rock. But really, from a wideout standpoint, they did not play their best game. They're going to have to show up this weekend against Penn State at home if they want to have success, because they've got the playmaking ability. But the little things showed up in a really tight game on the road against Minnesota.
Longest pass play, 18 yards. And again, maybe that speaks to the offensive line and protection and inability to set up some of those longer pass plays. But when you talk about how talented the quarterback is and how talented the wide receivers are, that doesn't really add up.
Well, I'll say one more thing on that. And coming to the Big Ten, I've asked Jake this many times and other analysts. The wind is a factor. And it was whipping in that stadium. It was my first time ever being in that stadium, and it was changing as the game was going on. The flags at the top of the stadium, the flags in the field goal post or on the field, they were all going in different directions. So some of those deep balls where you've seen SC make completions like they did a week ago against Wisconsin or even at times against Michigan, the ball would flutter. It'd be off a little bit. So I haven't talked to Miller Moss about it, but from watching it or talking to Red on the sideline, I think that also had a factor. When you're talking about a game of inches, when you got to make a play on the ball and 3 inches one way or the other is an incompletion, it was advantage Minnesota on Saturday night.
Second loss for the Trojans, the other one obviously coming against Michigan, and the Wolverines got knocked off as well. They were the other top 12 team in the Big Ten to suffer a loss on Saturday. Washington topped the Wolverines 27-17 in a national championship game rematch. The Huskies' 18th straight home win. Defense continued to shine, holding Michigan under 300 yards, forcing 2 key turnovers late. Washington has given up just 86 points in its first 6 games. Let's start there. Really a good response from them. Yogi, after the loss to Rutgers the previous week, that was a game where they were riddled with self-inflicted wounds. That was not an issue in this one.
No, I mean, only 2 penalties, played really clean. Wasn't perfect in the special teams area, right? They get a field goal blocked, they miss another one. But you saw that shot of Jed Fish. I just think he's masterful when it comes to knowing what it takes to build a program. Saw it in year 1 in Arizona. They had 8 games where they were within a score entering the 4th quarter, and they won 1 game all season. You look at this team this year, I mean, a lot of it, to your point, was self-inflicted negatives over the course of their losses. Didn't see that very often in this ball game. You saw them play a relatively clean game. You saw them also see elements of trickeration with the Jed Fish offensive mind and Brennan Carroll and Jimmy Doherty and company. But really impressive. And then to me, the 2 most impressive plays were when they, broke the tie and they go down and score. That's where they move the defensive front of Michigan. They move the best defensive front in this league, and you could argue in America. 2 straight plays, Jonah Coleman finds a nice lane and then finds pay dirt and a touchdown. They move the line of scrimmage back. And that, to me, is what stood out in this ball game. All phases, of course, making the pick at the end was great, a nice play. But they got a program-defining win. And I think for Jedfish and UW, look out, man. They're going to be a tough out for everybody. I think a lot of us thought that they would get the win this weekend. They met the moment. And then when the surge came from Michigan, they bounced right back. So just happy for him and that program in that regard. And even what he said afterwards was total class. You know, he didn't try to take credit for being there a year ago with a national championship contending team. He said, I hope they feel like they avenge that, not we avenge that. And I just thought his decision on what to say and how to say it is always spot on, and was just really impressed with how he handled the moment.
Yeah, I thought Jed Fish and Steve Belichick really won the day, and I mean it was from the very first play when you run a double move and beat Jair Hill. I felt Michigan's secondary that was a seed that was planted into their psyche that affected them throughout the game. And when you talk about offensive line play, that was going to be the big question mark for Washington. They lost everyone from their Joe Moore Award offensive line. Sacks are not just an offensive line statistic; it's on the quarterback too. Will Rogers had an average time to throw of 2.15 seconds. Washington's pass blocking grade was a 31 out of 100, so it's not great. Will Rogers and Jed Fish had the awareness to get the ball out on time, and I also think from an adjustment standpoint, what I'd like to see from Michigan and Wink Martindale is get up and press at times. There was far too often Washington just throwing the ball into green grass 2 seconds after the snap where your defensive line couldn't affect the game. And then for Steve Belichick, this defense doesn't have very many stars, right? But they play quality defense. And when Tuttle comes in, the game looked like it completely changed. Like your game plan is night and day for when Jack Tuttle's the quarterback versus when Alex Orji is the quarterback. They had that initial drive, and I think Michigan thinks, okay, we can win this game. We found something. Outside of that, Steve Belichick and the Washington defense completely adjusted and shut them down. So from a coaching standpoint, the Washington staff, they won the day.
Going to be a lot of focus on the Michigan quarterback issue, and we'll talk about that as the week goes on. But to your point, pass defense, they were third in the nation in pass efficiency defense last year. They are 65th this year. And again, I realize they've had injuries and personnel turnover, but Washington lost almost its entire team, and their defense is performing far better. So lots to talk about. Penn State 5-0 after topping UCLA 27-11. It's the fourth straight 5-0 start for the Nittany Lions, the only school in the country that can make that claim. It's the first time in school history Penn State has started 5-0 4 straight times. Yogi, this was not an overwhelming performance by any stretch, but they did it without Nick Singleton. I would say the game was never in doubt. What do you make of Penn State and this win over the Bruins?
It was a workmanlike. It's probably the way that I would state it. Look, UCLA is a proud program. They were going to come out and give their best effort. They did that in a tremendous environment behind first-time starter Justin Martin. I think from a Penn State standpoint, I was never blown away with things that they did defensively, but as the game wore on, they do what they've done to really everybody over the course of years. I think was just wear you out and lean on you. And then before you know it, it's Abdul Carter in the backfield, it's Zane Durant in the backfield. And then now, all of a sudden, to your point, the game's over. So I think always in command, I'd agree with that. I thought offensively, while you didn't see necessarily the explosive nature of this offense, you still see the creativity of it. And I can't wait to watch that this weekend as they play USC. Drew Aller is my biggest takeaway, probably. His confidence, man, you just see it. It just grows every single week. Command at the line of scrimmage, audible plays, ball placement. We listen to him post-game. I love that for him. In his second year as a starter, he's got some scars. And now he's got a big opportunity on the road this weekend, and we know what lies ahead for this team. So I probably categorize it as pretty workmanlike against the Bruins.
I felt Penn State's offensive line had taken a step forward to start this season. I think that was probably their worst game of the season to this point. Obviously, losing Singleton hurts you, but Katron Allen is more than capable, and he only had 85 yards rushing on the day. I think UCLA got their first sack of the season since week 1 as well. 1 sack, okay, but still, it's the context. So you think about where Penn State's at with a big matchup coming up this weekend. You would have liked to see them play perfect, but I'm still confident in where they're at as a team. At this point, I'm not yet certain, particularly in the trenches.
Right, just 85 rushing yards in this game. Is the first time they've been under 200 all season. I mean, they have run the ball so well. And again, Singleton
it's
being
an outlier,
out,
right?
No
Still,
doubt.
but
and
yes.
Singleton being out is a huge part of it. But again, 5-0 for Penn State. I like their chances to get to a bowl, but I love Indiana's chances because they've wrapped it up. The Hoosiers are the only Big Ten team that's guaranteed a bowl at this point. 6-0 for the first time since 1967. They topped Northwestern 41-24, ending an 8-game losing streak in Evanston. They joined Miami as the only two 6-0 teams in the nation. Of course, Miami won very late at night, so Indiana was the first team to wrap up a bowl game in these United States of America. Yogi, just as we all predicted, they actually had a little bit of game pressure in this game, and give Northwestern, certainly offensively, give them some credit, but they had no answer for Indiana's offense, which is just seemingly an endless reservoir of really talented players.
Yeah, I mean, Curtis Rourke is seeing the field with tremendous precision. He's anticipating where defensive droppers are going to be located. Their run-pass option game are often called the RPO game. He's just thriving and throwing slants, touchdowns. There's another one right there, a little play action for this Indiana offense. And I love when it was close, how they responded. It's 27-24 with 6 minutes left in the game, and away they go. They just respond. And I think that is the veteran nature of this team. And even what Coach Cignetti said afterwards, you think about the guys that came with him from JMU. They've won 20 of their last 21 games. Like, they know how to win, right? And I just love that. And then you add in Rourke, and the quote that he continues to say, I think he said it after every game, is that he's unflappable. He's proven to be that, right? You have to talk about Curtis Rourke as being in the top third quarterbacks in this league and the way he continues to play and perform on the stage, which he gets every Saturday with this team.
Maybe even the best quarterback in the league at this point. Certainly, Yogi, to your point, you got to have him in that conversation. Indiana they're a football team. You know what I mean? Like, you just say, that is a freaking football team. They know exactly who they are. And I think that shows up when they face some of that adversity. In a tight game, the team is unflappable. They know exactly who they are. Curtis Rourke, he made some very uncharacteristic throws versus Maryland, and yet he didn't blink. It doesn't affect them. He shakes it off, and they continue to move the ball down the field. And they're so multiple offensively, so many different weapons they can get involved, including their tight end, Zach Horton. But then the run game as well. Northwestern's defense was allowing 2.8 yards per carry on the season. Indiana beats that mark, gets up to 4.3. So they have answers to everything, at least to this point. I understand that the schedule will get tougher down the stretch, but they've had answers to anything that their opponents have presented to them.
That was the thing that really impressed me, was the first two drives Northwestern stopped them, and Northwestern has been pretty good defensively this year. The issues have just been, offensively, they've been dreadful. They were better offensively in this game, to their credit. But Indiana gets stopped on the first two drives, Yogi, and then they score on 7 drives in a row against what, again, I think evidence shows us is a pretty good defense. It is remarkable when they get going just how many guys they have that can beat you and the confidence with which they are playing.
Yeah, look, Mike Shanahan is doing a heck of a job as the offensive coordinator. He and Tino Sinceri coaches the quarterbacks and co-coordinator as well. You just look at how guys are in position schematically. You know, if you pause it before the quarterback throws the ball, on pretty much every given snap, you see where the answer is. And that's what I like about this offense. They're not just throwing it to green grass. They're not just playing catch. Like, you really have to play quarterback. There's a lot on the shoulders and within the mind of Curtis Rourke every snap, from pass protection to what is the defense going to do and what do they actually do. And I just see that is really his growth from being there in training camp with Curtis Rourke, saying, ooh, post-snap, how did he handle it? And granted, he probably had one of his most challenging practices that day we were there, Dave, to now you turn the game on. You're like, this guy understands where to go with the ball. And I just got to give the credit to Mike Shanahan and Tino Sinceri and this offensive staff, because they're doing a nice job. And then to Jake's point, the complementary element is obvious, right? Tyson Lawton, the way they run the football, this offensive line, the push they're getting is impressive. And then you flip it to defensively. I love what Aiden Fisher has done, right? He just continues again. Game on the line. You think that Northwestern's about to take the momentum back. Boom, pressure in the backfield, big play. So to your point, yeah, they're a football team. They're tough, they're rugged. They might not have a bunch of first-round picks, but they don't give a rip. They want to just go play and punch you in the mouth, and that's the attitude that Coach Cignetti, I think, has brought along with tremendous confidence.
You know, red zone scoring has been a huge storyline and decider of winners and losers in this league. You think about Washington versus Rutgers, red zone scoring. You think about Nebraska Rutgers, red zone scoring. So they score on 7 of those 9 drives, but 5 of them are touchdowns.
Right.
It's hard to score score down there. Everything gets condensed, and they're finding ways to score. And I think a big reason of that is because they're so multiple offensively.
And that's what they've done all year. They've made 37 red zone trips. They've scored 30 touchdowns. 30 for 37 touchdowns. Like, they're not settling
really impressive
for 3. Yeah, they're really good. A bye next week, then they take on Nebraska. The actual process of getting there may not have been pretty, but the final result was an absolute thing of beauty for Nebraska, topping Rutgers 14-7 to improve to 5-1 on the year. It was just the Huskers' 9th win in their last 40 one-score games. Nebraska is 1 win away from ending its 7-year bowl drought, which is the longest among power conference teams. And Yogi, this one falls squarely under the category of a win is a win.
Yeah, well, I think there's a couple takeaways. One, I want to thank Coach Rule because that little inside handoff they ran, I'm stealing that for my flag team this weekend, by the way. We're 1-0 with a big win yesterday. Okay, number 2, it was the defense, man. It was this front 7. I mean, he's talking about 6 straight plays, 6 straight times I got to stop Rutgers and Kyle Monangai in this offense on the goal line. I mean, it was just impressive. They rose up, and we talked about it off the top. Like, can you meet the moment? They did exactly that. I mean, and time again, this was a really fun game to watch just because of the coaching and the style of play. We know the environment, of course, allowed it. Every time you saw the big picture of that crowd, you're like, wow, I bet this was just rocking on Saturday if you were there in person. And then overall for Nebraska, we know the phrase. It's the Doc series, chasing 3. We know all the 3-point losses in the tight games. And, of course, what happened when they were at home last time in overtime against Illinois. So this was great to see them meet that moment and the veteran players step up on the defensive front, whether it was Ty Robinson or other guys making plays. That, to me, was the takeout from this game.
Yeah, it's Tony White, it's that defensive front, and Nebraska going into this game, they hadn't given up a rush touchdown, a running touchdown all season.
Still haven't.
Still haven't.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, oh well, it's Kyle Monangai, like,
right.
Of course, yes, Kyle Monangai, and they gave him their fair chance. Except he met Nash Hutchmaker and Ty Robinson in this defensive front. So this was just a classic Big Ten football game, and I think this is really big for Matt Rule. And this is a game that Nebraska. These are the games they've lost in recent years.
Yep.
And to come away with a win when it was less than perfect, certainly, that's huge for their confidence and psyche going forward.
Again, 9 of their last 40 one-possession games they won. And
crazy.
And Rutgers had won 4 in a row. I mean,
Yes.
Rutgers was winning games like this. So push comes to shove, you go right down to the wire, and it is Nebraska that figures out a way to win. Nebraska gets a bye next week. Rutgers will move on to face Wisconsin, a game you can see here on the Big Ten Network. And speaking of the Badgers, wow, they absolutely demolished Purdue. 52-6. It marked Wisconsin's largest margin of victory ever in the 91-game history of this series. Tawee Walker ran for 3 TDs for the Badgers, who accumulated 589 yards of offense. Jake, Wisconsin needed this desperately. I mean, we had talked so much about not just that this offense wasn't overly effective, but really talking about the identity of this offense and kind of who are they under Phil Longo. Purdue certainly had a lot to do with it. I don't think there's any question, but this has got to be a shot in the arm for the confidence of the Badgers.
1,000%. And it shows them what they're capable of. But it's on them now going forward to say that this is who they are. And football's a game of opportunity. Okay, Van Dyke goes down. Braden Locke, you're the quarterback now. Played his best game of the season last week. Ches Malusi, their running back, steps away from the team. Tawee Walker gets more opportunities. He took full advantage of it. And then they lose Will Pauling, who's their top wide receiver, and Bryson Green, probably their wide receiver too. Well, how about Kakahuna? How about Vinny Anthony? How about C.J. Williams? There were so many guys that we thought going into the season were going to be the key players for Wisconsin's offense that are now out. And that led to the opportunity for other guys to step up. And like we've been saying all show, those guys for Wisconsin met the moment.
Yogs, your take on this one?
To me, I'm curious on the other side for Purdue. You know, how is this staff going to rally this team? Because there's a lot of football left to play. And we all know that majority of this game is mental. And you have to find different ways to motivate your team. And you have to make sure that this locker room does not become full of locker room lawyers, right? It cannot be about me. And I think when you add in new players via the transfer portal, it's one of the first questions we all ask coaches: how you navigating the culture, how you making sure this thing is one heartbeat and truly connected. That's their challenge. I believe in it. I can't wait just from spending a little time with their staff this summer. But that is going to be number one, right? Regardless of score, regardless of outcome, like the games don't get any easier for Purdue. So that's what I want to know. Like, how are they going to navigate the most challenging time? Because their head coach said it afterwards, right? And his quote was, "We're a bad football team right now." Okay, how are you going to go north? How are you going to get this thing moving positive? It's a big challenge. How do you do it? You start with small wins. You start with enthusiastic practices. You have to do something to shift this team's energy. They know the reality. Hudson Card talked about it after the game of, hey, we need to play better. But you got to find these little ways to motivate, inspire schematically, make a couple little changes so guys can play even faster. Because the faster you play, the less you have to think, especially in challenging in situations like this. You give yourself a shot, and they're going to have to because they got some tough games coming up.
Well, they do. They go to Illinois coming up this week. The Illini will be rested. We know how well they played. And then after that, they have Oregon coming to Ross-Ade. So it does not get easier for the Boilermakers by any stretch. A lot of work to do, no doubt, for Ryan Walters and that staff. The dramatic conclusion of our show coming up next, including the ever-popular helmet stickers. Who are the guys singling out for their virtual recognition this weekend? They'll let us know next. It is time to go around the Big Ten volleyball from the weekend. Penn State up to 14-1 after sweeping Oregon. Another top 25 battle Saturday night. USC topped the Gophers. Yesterday saw each of the three top 10 teams that were in action finish off sweeps. Wisconsin, Nebraska, and Purdue all convincing winners. Field hockey, Northwestern is now 12-0. Won its two games this weekend over Rutgers and Penn State by a combined 11-2, including a season-high 7 goals in yesterday's win over the 17th-ranked Nittany Lions. The Cats are ranked number 2 in the country. Maryland is not far behind at number 5. They pounded number 10 Iowa 5-0 for their largest margin ever in 28 all-time matchups with the Hawks. The hockey regular season starts this weekend. I kid you not, Wisconsin, you'll recall, had a really nice first year under Mike Hastings. They're ranked 10th entering the season, went on the road Saturday to top number 15 Omaha in an exhibition game, 3-2. Quinn Finley, the game winner in overtime. Hard to believe we're already at week 7 this week, halfway through the regular season. It is a week we have had circled with Ohio State, Oregon, and Penn State, USC. 2 games on the network, Badgers and Scarlet Knights early, Minnesota, UCLA late. Northwestern and Maryland will get things going on Friday nights. How about one last look at the week that was? It's our helmet stickers, the individuals that stood out. Yogi, lead us off.
Well, I'm going to start with a guy who began his life as a football player as a wide receiver, and then his senior in high school decided, no, I'm going to go play running back. Now he's leading Minnesota. He was their leading receiver and rusher in Darius Taylor. So helmet sticker number 1 goes to you. Epic moment. You'll never forget it. Number 2, how about late in the game? And you're thinking, here comes Michigan. No. Here comes Cameron Fabiku-Lannon, the safety. The captain makes a pick to pretty much seal the game. Impressive by him. And then lastly, my favorite story of the weekend, fellas. Friday night in my hotel room, I'm watching Michigan State, Oregon, and I moved to tears in the third quarter as I'm watching 3 individuals who have beaten cancer ring the bell. So my sticker goes to Dan Lanning and his family. His wife, Sophia, 2017, was diagnosed with cancer, a rare form of cancer. Number 1, she beat it. And then her and her 3 sons, their 3 sons, they designed the heroes uniforms. Those are the threads the Ducks wore on Friday night. They celebrated people who are also competing to stop out cancer. And that was my favorite moment by far in what was an amazing weekend in college football.
I'm going to start with Ohio State's defense, and I'm going to go with Sonny Styles, a guy that I think has made such an impact even beyond just the stats. He was a safety last year. They move him down in the box. He has become a complete asset for what Jim Knowles wants to do defensively. Everywhere the football is, that's where you can find him. I'll give Corey Parrish a shout out too. We're watching a guy basically in real time. You're seeing his confidence grow. I mean, to close the game and make that type of play, unbelievable. And then you consider the context of the story of staying home.
Right.
Awesome story. Shiano called Ty Robinson and Nash Hutmaker a top 5 unit in college football. He said that in his post-game presser. And I think that he's absolutely right. Those guys had such an impact. The goal line stand, just so disruptive on the interior of that Nebraska front, was just blown away by the way they performed last weekend.
They've been really good all year. I mean, top 10 in the nation in sacks and tackles for loss. That Nebraska defense is really, really good. I'm glad that we got Fabiculanen in. I was hoping for a Trech Kekahuna as well. But,
Sorry.
I'm just saying, we had some good,
shout out to Kekahuna,
some good
great.
names,
Yeah.
some good names to rattle off. Thanks for joining us. See you next time.